Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Thought I was late.
Or we're early.
Well, no, yeah. Okay. Figured you guys had started already and, on your way. Okay. All right. Well, I'm scheduled for the vaccine this week. We'll see if it happens.
Yay.
See if it happens. We'll see. I haven't gotten an email yet saying that they're canceling or out.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, I've seen like a lot of people saying that they have appointments. So.
Yeah, I got this about, I don't know, when I first opened it up, I was able to get one,
That's really great.
Yeah, but it took me a couple hours. And then people have been getting them, and I check every once in a while to see if I could get one that's a little bit more convenient, but then I would have to spend like an hour every day, like trying to, just forget it. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what it takes. Unfortunately, it seems like. I don't know. My daughter did it already.
Really? That's good.
Hmm?
That's good. That's nice.
Yeah. You hear about people left and right.
Yeah. Well, right, but there's also people who they can't get appointments and stuff. So, well, we'll see how it goes. So I'll let you know next week.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be fine.
What's that? Yeah.
I said I'm sure it will be fine. I mean, it's like very few people have any kind of
the side effects. It just, I've just heard that cancellations and stuff like that because.
Yeah. Well, where are you gonna go?
It's in the South Bronx.
Okay. It's like, the ones that did the most cancellations was Mount Sinai,
right.
But I really haven't heard of many other places that did.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of silly. Shavua Tov.
Could be centralized. All right, whatever. It's the healthcare system. So.
Okay, everyone's talking about their vaccine still?
I haven't gotten it, but this week I'm supposed to get it. So.
Okay, I hope you get it.
I don't qualify, so.
Yeah, well, that's because you're so young.
Right, I'm 17, so I guess.
Exactly.
See, the perks.
What?
How did it go last Sunday?
I went well. I did Sunday and Monday. It was really actually quite exciting. I totally didn't need to be there. We started at 10 a.m. even though I got there at 7. So on Monday,
you predicted that though.
I know. And then I didn't even know, no one even knew what time we started. It was ridiculous, but it was the city, first of all.
Right.
I think Saturday was the first day. So they really were just getting their act together. There was some preparation to do. So but it wasn't 2.5 hours.
Right.
So Monday I did it again and I showed up at 9:35, so it was fine. And it was very, very good. It was quite interesting. They had a really good system. It was a ton of cities.
Yeah. Where did you do it?
I did it at the educational place right near Lehman College, near the.
Oh, okay.
High School for American Studies, or
I think just next to that. The
building, the parking lot there.
Well, we did it inside. There's a high school. There's like a school there. There's a bunch of schools, right?
Yeah, American Studies. Yeah.
So maybe I was in one of those schools.
Yeah. That's where my son went. Yeah.
So it was very efficient. There's no school, I guess. Either there's no school or it was just Sunday or Monday.
No, high schools are closed.
Okay, well, there you go. So they ran very, there were a lot of city people, of course.
Yeah.
It was mostly volunteers or city Department of Ed employees, so I guess get paid for it. Okay. And a few volunteers like me, and it was great. And we did, like 700 or 800 people each day.
Wow. That's really good.
It was, the eligibility is people above 65, I think, or 75, 65, plus 65, educators and frontline people in grocery store.
Right.
So
did people have to?
So that's how I can get it.
It was a lot of young people who are educators store. Or sort of educators. Some of them were, tenuous, I would say, but they got it. So in any event, let's learn. Did
people have to bring proof that they were educators?
I think they were supposed to, but I did not check. It wasn't my role.
I've heard stories of people.
When my daughter went, I mean, she had to show everything under the sun to prove that she was like an educator, and her license and her DOE like accreditation and whatever. But I've heard of people that said that they just walked in and they were not asked a thing. They could have been 12 for all they knew, and it didn't make a difference.
Right. I don't know.
So when are you doing it again? Maybe I can show up since you're not going to check anything.
They closed all the sites. They ran out of vaccine.
Oh, okay.
They closed all the sites. So I don't know until they get more. But
You'll let us know.
We used it all up. Anyways, but the truth is that people probably went through 8 or 9 checks before they got to me. You know what I mean? Like I'm at top of the line. So
of course.
I could be that they did. I'm sure they did. Anyways, let's learn the daf. Today's daf is daf samach gimel sag. We are on daf samach bet on the bet Mesechet Pesachim, 4 lines from the bottom. So we have transitioned over the last week to discussing the karban, and so it's a lot of discussion about kachim. Reminds us all of our zvachim and menachot days, right? We're going to bring back many memories from that. But our most recent Mishnah discussed the question of if when you shech the animal, you recall from the first Mishnah in Zvachim, there are only 2 karbanot that you have to do shchita lishma. When you shech them, it has to be for the purpose of the person bringing the karban. One is a karban chatat, right, which is a sacrifice for sin. And if you bring it for a different person or for the wrong person, it doesn't work. It's puzzle. And the second is karban pesach, which has to be brought for the intention of the people who are signed up to be part of that karban. So one of the things we said in our Mishnah was if you shecht it for people who are not appropriate, it's puzzle. But if you shecht it for people who are some appropriate and some not appropriate, then it's okay. As long as there's some people who you're shechting it for who can potentially eat the karban. It doesn't have to be all the people. It just has to be some of the people. So said the Mishnah, now that's what we're up to, 4 lines from the bottom. Tanya, the Braita says, Acherim omrim, the opinion of the Acherim, and we don't know who the Acherim are, but these Tanaim, Hikdim mulim la'arelim. If you shech the animal and you say, I'm doing this for both people who have a brit milah and people who don't have a brit milah, arelim. Remember, an arel, it says in the pasuk, kol arel lo yochavo, right? An arel can obviously not eat the karban pesach. So you say, we're just getting started, 4 lines from the bottom, on samach bet amud bet. If you say, I am shechting this animal, this karban pesach, for a group of people, including some who can eat it and some who can't. So if you first say the people who are kasher, the mulim, who have a brit milah, and then you say the arelim, then it's kasher. But if you say 3 lines from the bottom, arelim the mulim, if you first say I'm shechting this for those who are arel, or you say Danny and Joe, right? And Danny's an arel and Joe is okay, then it's pasul. That's the Braita. So it depends not on who you shecht it for, but the order you say it.
I thought we were just talking about machshava. Not, you don't have to declare.
So that's a very good point, but I would say that the general sense, and Tosha says this explicitly, is that machshava means you speak it out, you say the words. You have to think it and articulate it for kachim. So machshava and kachim always means that you say it out, you think it and you say it. Okay? So says the Gemara why? So 3 lines on the bottom. Maishna mulim na'arelim. Why is it that if you say those who have a brit milah before those who are arel, it's kasher, the kula arla be'ina veleka. In order for it to be puzzle, you have to shecht it for people who are, all the people you shechted it for are arelim, not some of them. And so since you had some kasher, it's okay. So then why not the other way too? Arelim the mulim nami kula arla be'ina veleka. If you say first arelim and then mulim, it should still be kosher because you didn't do it for everyone who's not able to eat it. Lema, maybe this is kasavar acherim. Maybe the Tana, who is the acherim, is of the opinion that eino the shchita ela b'sof. That when you talk about shchita as an action, shchita, not, instead of thinking of it as the whole action, the 5-10 seconds where you're moving the knife and you're killing the animal, it only applies to that last instant where you cut the second, part of the animal, the second veshet, I guess, right? Second siman is the word, sorry, that's what I was looking for. And that instant, when you cut the second siman, is one, fraction of a second. And that's what Rava said. Damar Rava daini machloket, whole different discussion in Zvachim, but Rava says that that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir, right? This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, that eino shchita elo b'sof. And therefore, shchita is an instantaneous thing. Hilkach, hikdim mulim la'arelim, If you first say mulim, then the word mulim, or the people mulim, are chal, they activate at the second you did shchita, and therefore it's okay. Therefore it's kosher. If you have the mulim come, if you say mulim before people who are uncircumcised, then mulim chayli arelim lo chayli. Then the carbon is chal on the mulim and not on the arelim. But if you're hikdim arelim the mulim, then arelim chayli mulim lo chayli. The opposite would be the case. If you're makdim arelim to mulim, then since you first said those who are uncircumcised, and the second shchita happened, that is what was chal, and therefore the whole carbon basically was being done for those who are unable to eat it, and that's why it's not kosher. That's the Gemara's answer. It's the first. Well, it's lema. Maybe that's the reason. Says Rabba Amar Rabba. No, lo, it's not the reason because that's really not the way we paskin. La'olam kasaver achirim yashna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof. Really, the achirim hold, which is the dominant opinion in Zvachim, that shchita goes from the beginning of the act of cutting till you finish. Finally, cutting the second siman. So the act of shchita, which again probably it doesn't take that long, but it takes a few seconds, right? That whole thing is considered the act of shchita. And hacha b'mayaskinan, here the question is, kigon shegamar b'libo letervayu. This is where Tosas is proof, by the way. But where you internally, you said, I want to shech this animal, this carbon pesach, for a group of people that includes bein mulim, bein arelim. It includes, 20 people. 18 of them are circumcised, the men at least. Two of the men, are not circumcised, arelim. And you're hotzi bepiv, but what you say verbally, you think both groups. But what you say is arelim. You say, I'm shechting this for, and again, it doesn't mean that you necessarily say arelim. You might say, I'm shechting it for Ruvain and Shimon, and then you're going down the list, right? But you only get through Ruvain and Shimon who are arelim. Below he speak lomar lemulim ad shenigmar shechita b'arelim. You didn't get to say your whole list. It's like sometimes you're saying your mishaberach for all the sick people, right? You don't finish your list before they keep going. So you finish the act of shchita. Doesn't like it. You finish the act of shchita before you said any of the names of people who had a brit milah. And the hapligi, the Remeir savar, Remeir holds lo beinam pivli bo shavim. You don't need your mouth, meaning what you articulate and what you think in your heart, to be equal. And therefore we go after what you said. And since what you said is that it's only for Ruvain and Shimon, and they are arelim, and so nobody you shechted this animal for can eat it, it's not kosher. Rabbanan savri v'ina lit pivli bo shavim. Rabbanan say, no, you do need to match those things, and therefore you go after what's in your heart. Okay? Ask the Gemara, is that true? Because Rabbi Meir, does Rabbi Meir really hold lo be'inan pivli bo shavim? That you don't need to synchronize what you're thinking and what you're saying. For a minute, there's a braita. Again, this is a stam braita, which we assume is Rabbi Meir because he's the author of stam braita, right? The braita says, "Hamitkavein lomar truma." Right? Let's say you pick a section of your grain and you pick it up and you say this section should be truma. That's what you think to say, but like it happens many times, you say the wrong thing. V'amer ma'aser. You mistake it. Instead of saying truma, you say the word maaser. You're thinking truma, you want it to be truma. The word that comes out of your mouth is this grain should be maaser. Or the opposite. You want the grain to be maaser, v'omer truma. Oh, let's say you really got a fight with your neighbor and you make a shvuah she'ini nichnas lebayit zeh. I'm not going into 668. But instead you said the wrong address. V'omer lezeh. You made a mistake. So you thought of one person and you said a different person. Or you said, She'eni ne'neh lezeh. I won't give any hana, or I won't get hana, really means give to this person. But again, Omar lezeh. All of these things, you had one thing in mind, but you said something else. Says the Braita, Lo Amar Klum. Your words have no effect. Ad sheyu pivli bo shavim. Right? Words only matter if that's really what you meant. Now, of course, there's no way to know what you meant unless you know internally. But if you're confident that you didn't mean this, your shvuah is not chal. You don't have to worry about it, right? Because you didn't. Your words and your thoughts have to be the same. So therefore, if here you thought I'm going to shech this carbon pesach for a group of 20 people, right? But you only were able to articulate 2 of them, and the other one 18 you couldn't say, and those 2 happen to be arelim. It doesn't matter. It still goes for all 20 people. So clearly, Rabbi Meir, could not have that opinion. Elo Amar Abaya, says Abaya, got a whole nother explanation. Reisha, meaning the beginning where you said, if I'm doing it for those who have a Brit Milah and those who are Arel, it's Kasher, that's the Amar. It's where you said, you didn't just say together as a group. You said, Siman Rishon Limulim. You had a lot of kavana, like a real Hasidic thing, right? You're going to do every deliberate part of this act of shechita with something in mind. So the first siman, the first part of the animal, the windpipe or the esophagus against the beshet, and the kana that you cut is going to be for mulim, for the people in the chabura who have a brit milah. Siman sheni af la'arelim. You're going to do the siman sheni also for those who can't eat the carbon pesach. So now there it's okay. The siman sheni nami peticha le'mulim. Sorry?
This is not the bright anymore, is it?
This is not the right. This is Abaya's explanation of the right.
Okay. Which starts Ela Amar Abaya.
Ela Amar Abaya. Says Abaya, this is the way you have to understand the bright. The Reish is where you say the Siman Rishon is for those who are kosher to eat the karba. The Siman Sheni is for other people also who can eat the karba. And there, since you said also, in both segments, both the Siman Rishon and the Siman Sheni, there were some people included who could eat the karba. Right? The first Siman was all for people who can eat it. The second Siman was for also people who couldn't eat it, but included people who could eat it, and therefore it's kosher. But Seifa, the second case, is where you flip the order, and you said Siman Rishon la'arelim. The first Siman is only for those who can't eat it, in which case you got a problem, because since no one could eat it from that Siman, it's not going to be kosher. Siman Sheni is also limulim, and therefore the Siman Rishon hala peticha bein mulim. In the Siman Rishon, there's no mixture. Actually, the word peticha means a mixture of those who have a Brit Milah. And the Chiddush here of Rabbi Meir, who says it's possible, is Latame. That goes according to Rabbi Meir's opinion that he's articulated elsewhere. The Amar Mifaglim B'chatzi Matir. Again, just a real brief, not so brief, reminder of Zvachim. Remember the question of Mifaglim, pigol, is if you shecht an animal with a machshava to eat it or to sprinkle the blood outside of the right time, chutz lizman. Right, that's called pigol. Tosfos does point out here, just for Hanan's point, that when we say pigol is a machshava, it's a misnomer because it always means an articulation. Machshava always means you say it. Right? You think it and you say it. But you say when you shech this animal, I'm going to eat it or to do the zrika in a time that I'm not allowed to do that. The question that we have in Zvachim is, what if you say, I'm doing the first siman in order to zorik the blood outside of the zman, and the second siman for the original, for the regular time. So that's called chatzi matir, right? Half of what is okay, half of what is needed for properly shechting the animal. And Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that you can be mefaglim b'chatzi matir, and the same thing would be true here. If you have a machshava that you're going to feed this carbon pesach only to people who can't eat it, people who are arelim, even if you do it only in half of the shechita, according to Rimeir, that would passel the whole thing. But Rabbanan, the Tamayo, the Amri, ein mefaglim b'chatzi matir. According to the Chachamim, the only time you have pigol is if the machshava is during the entire act of shechting the animal, not just half the act. And so, therefore, since you need the entire act, if you have a machshava for half of it, it will not passel the carbon. Okay.
Two questions. What if you don't say anything? You slaughter it. You have an intention in your mind, but you say nothing. Then it's okay, right?
Then it's okay. Yes.
Okay. And who said? We never said that you. You never said that you have to name everybody in the chabura that you're slaughtering this. Where did this come from?
You don't necessarily need to name it. You could say, I'm doing this for my chabura. You don't have to. I the names because you're saying Arel, but you happen to do it that way. Again, so you could just say, I'm doing it for this entire chabura, but the only way you can have some people arelim and some people arelim is if you spoke out some of them, right?
Right, but if you have in mind your chabura, some of them are arelim, some of them are not. And
so we said in the Mishnah,
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it for this chabura. You're fine, right?
We said in the Mishnah, as long as some of the people are able to eat it, it's okay.
Right.
The question is, if you do half of it for only people who can eat it, is that enough to pass it?
Right. That's if you declare it.
Good, correct.
Right. Okay. But I don't see why you would even declare the names of the people. I mean,
that's true, but I guess you wanted to. You sometimes the same reason people say hineni muchina muzum, right?
All right.
Speak it out.
Some people declare before Kiddush, like I'm making Kiddush for you.
Right. There you go.
Same thing.
But the Chavurah is not there, aren't they? Like back home and stuff like that. I mean,
Well,
maybe
that's in Yerushalayim, right? They have to be in the
they're in
city.
Yerushalayim, but they're not in the.
They're not all there. I mean, some of them might be there. I'd probably go for the experience. We're going to get to the experience in a little bit. But yeah, they don't have to be there. No, there's no, and I can't imagine Nazar can contain all those people, right?
Right. I thought most of them are back, waiting for the.
It makes sense. I mean, it's probably 15, 20 people in the Chabur, right?
Rabbi, there's our expands to hold everyone. You know that.
Okay.
But during Corona, maybe
Right.
50% capacity.
Okay.
Continues the Mishnah. Hashochet es Pesach al hachametz. Right, there's a very interesting halacha by Pesach, which we've quoted before, which says, I'll read the pasuk. It says, "Lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi." Right, don't shecht on chametz, the blood of the zevach. And then I'll just read the end of the pasuk because it's very important for our sugya. V'lo yalim laboker zevach chag haPesach. Don't leave over. This is a pasuk in Perek Lamed Daled and Shemot, in the end of I think Ki Tisa. Right, don't leave over for the morning the carbon Pesach. Okay, so lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi. What in the world does that mean? Don't shecht on chametz the blood of my zevach. Says the Mishnah. What that means is that if you're shochet at Pesach, if you shecht the carbon Pesach and you have chametz al chametz over balotase, you over a lotase, you get makot, like a regular lotase. Bring a carbon, etc. Well, not necessarily carbon, but you get makot. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af hatamid. That this does not just include the carbon Pesach, but on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, even if you shech the carbon tamid and you have chametz, you're also over this lotase of lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi, and we'll see in the Gemara that we learned that because the pasuk is not very specific. It doesn't say dam Pesach, it says dam zivchi. Rabbi Shimon
That
said,
means anywhere in your home or in your pocket.
very good question. We'll get there in the Gemara. But yes, so it doesn't say. It does not say al right. It says lo tishchot al chametz. You might think you're standing on the chametz, right, or something like that. Anyways, we're gonna see. Just to give it away, it probably means it's in your pocket. You're holding it. Not it's in your house. You're holding it. But we'll discuss it in the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon says something very interesting, which is, and we'll get to this tomorrow's daf. HaPesach bar ba'asar. That in fact, this prohibition of lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi applies at two different times. It applies on Erev Pesach in the afternoon when you bring the carbon Pesach, and it applies during the entire holiday of Pesach. That if you shech the carbon during that time and you have chametz, you're over a lotase. But it depends on what carbon, because it has to be a kosher carbon. If you shech the non-kosher carbon and you have chametz, you're not over a lotase, because you didn't do a proper shechita. And therefore, as we said a lot last week, if it's Pesach, if it's a carbon Pesach, bar ba'asar, if you do it lishmo, if you shecht it for the people who are, this carbon is meant for, then you're chayav, this lo taseh, lo tishchot al chametz. But if you do it shalol lishmo, you're patur. Because remember, we said that a carbon Pesach that's brought shalol lishmo is not kosher. And so it's basically like you didn't do a carbon at all. And so the fact that you have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in your pocket does not make you over a lo taseh, right? Now, you didn't do a carbon Pesach, you got to find a replacement. But nonetheless, you're not chayav this lo taseh. But shar kol azvachim, but every other carbon that you're bringing on Erev Pesach, it bein lishman, bein shalol lishman patur. Whether you shecht it for the right purpose or not the right purpose, and you have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in your pocket, you're patur from this lo taseh. Because the Isser only applies to carbon Pesach. But b'moed, during Pesach, then it flips. If you do the carbon Pesach lishmo, then it's patur. Why? Because remember, if you bring a carbon Pesach on the third day of Pesach, it's not kosher. There's nothing, right? So therefore, you're patur because you didn't bring a kosher carbon with chametz. But if you do it shalol lishmo, if you recall, a carbon Pesach that's brought shalol lishmo becomes a shlamim, right? And so basically, it's like you brought a kosher shlamim, and therefore you're chayav. And as shar kol azvachim, every other carbon, bein lishman, bein shalol lishman, you'd be chayav, because remember, every other carbon is kosher, even if you do it shalol lishmo, except chutz min chatat, except for the second exception, which is a carbon chatat, sheshachtan shalol lishmo, which is not a kosher carbon, and therefore you're not over the lo taseh of lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi, because your shechita was not kosher. So that's Rabbi Shimon. Now, before we get to this second part of the Mishnah about the days, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, to answer James's question, says Rish Lakish, L'olam enu chayav ad sheyeh chametz l'shochet o l'zorek. You're only chayav if the chametz is owned by the one who's doing the shechita, or the one who's doing zrika, or echad mivnei chabura, or anyone who's part of that animal, that shechita, that group. Ad sheyeh imo ba'azara. The chametz has to be sitting with you in your pocket in the azara when you do the shechita. So if you have chametz back at home that you forgot to get rid of, that's not the prohibition. The prohibition is having it with you. Okay? Excuse me. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, I disagree. You don't have to have it with you in the azara. It still has to be the same people, but it does not literally have to be with you in the azara. Now says the Gemara, what's the machloket about? The my plea, right? What's the machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about whether or not the chametz has to be physically with you? So says the Gemara, well, one possibility is, remember the pasuk says lo tishchot al chametz, which literally means on or with chametz, and the question might be, says the Gemara, ilema, the third line, al b'samuch kamifligi. The machloket is whether al tells you it has to be literally with you, or it just means, somehow connected. Does al on that word mean next to it? And maybe Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish savar al b'samuch. Reish Lakish holds that when you say al, you mean with, meaning literally next to it. Rabbi Yochanan savar lo binin al b'samuch. That al could just mean in the same, concept, not necessarily the same physical space. Says the Gemara, that's a nice way to explain it, but that would be completely redundant because if the gumba chadazimna, everybody knows that they've already had this argument. It's not right. There's a Mishnah that says, very important Mishnah in the Mishnah says, sorry, where's the Mishnah's in Menachot, I think. Hashochet, yeah, I'm pretty sure at the end of Menachot. Hashochet, or towards the end. Hashochet toda lifnim. If you shech the carbon, remember a carbon toda is brought is an animal, right? It's brought with 40 loaves of minachot, right? 10 of 4 different kinds. So you would bake those loaves, you would buy them from the store. Rashi explains that when you make them and you dedicate this animal and these lechem, the lechem only is kodesh b'kedushat damim, right? It's only kodesh because you said I'm bringing this to the Beit HaMikdash. Once you shech the animal, and the kedusha then that goes onto the bread is kedushat haguf, right? Kedushat karban. So then it becomes the kedusha of an animal essentially that you shechted. There's a lot of differences between those things. The first one, of course, is that something that's kedushat damin, you can be podeh. You can always go to Hektish and say, I really want that bread back. Here's $50, and the money goes and gets the exchange of the kedusha. But something that's kedushat haguf or kedushat of a karban, you can't be podeh. Second of all, there's questions of tumah, right? Questions of that nature. You can't, there's certain levels of tumah that you can't eat for a karban that you can eat for something that's kedushat damim. So now let's say when you shecht your karban todah, the lechem is not with you in the azara. The bread is not there. You left it at the baker, right? You're late picking it up. You rush to the mizbeach. It's sitting there on, a few blocks away at the bakery. So says the Mishnah in Menachot, Hashochet todah lifnim. Let's say you shech to the todah inside the Beit HaMikdash, which you have to be, of course, right? But lachma chutz l'choma. But the bread, the bread, which is a matzah and that comes with it, is outside of the gates. It's not with it. Says the Mishnah, lo kidesh halechem. The lechem does not become kodesh, meaning it does not become a higher level of lachmei todah. It's just regular kedushat damim, but it doesn't become attached to the karban. So that's the Mishnah. Now it says the Gemara in Menachot, my chutz l'choma. What does it mean the bread is outside of the wall? So most of us would assume, which is what Reish Lakish says, or I would assume at least, that chutz l'choma means outside of the wall of the azara, right? It's not in the Beit HaMikdash. Says Rabbi Yochanan a fascinating thing. Chutz l'choma means chutz l'chomat Beit Pagi. And you guys remember we had Beit Pagi earlier. Beit Pagi is the external house of Yerushalayim, right? That's the external wall. It means outside of the city. So that the lechem is only not kodesh, not if it's outside of the azara. It could be at the baker outside of the azara in Yerushalayim. But if it's outside of Yerushalayim, the lechem can't be kodesh. That's for a whole other reason, right? Remember that a karban has to be eaten within Yerushalayim. And so if your lechem becomes kodesh, it becomes pasul b'yotzei. Remember, we had this whole halacha before about if you carry basar kodesh outside of Beit Pagi, right? Whether you have to go back and burn it. This should be familiar to everyone, but it was, I guess, 3 weeks ago, so around 21 daf ago. But either way, that's Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation. And avol chutz lechomat azara kiddush. But if the bread is just, the lechem is just outside of the azara, but it's inside Yerushalayim, then it does become kodesh. Because clearly, when it says al, right, the lechem needs to be al hatodah. It doesn't mean literally al; it means nearby or close enough. That's Rabbi Yochanan's explanation, right? V'lo be'inan al b'samuch. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar, afilu chutz lechomat azara lo kiddush. No, that what the Mishnah means is that if the bread is outside of the azara, it's not kodesh. Alma be'inan al b'samuch. And so therefore, by Toda, you have almost the exact same machloket. So why would you need to repeat it by chametz and carbon pesach? So that can't be the basis for the machloket. It must be, the issue is a whole nother concept, which is hatra'at safek kamifagi. Remember, every lotase, right, you have to warn the person before they do it for them to be chayav. You have to say, you're shechting a carbon. Remember, you're not allowed to have chametz with you. If you do have chametz, you're over in a lotase. The issue here is if the person doesn't have the chametz with them, then you have no idea if they have it or not. So the hatra'ah safek is by definition going to be existent in that case, right? Because you don't realize if they have it or not. Now, Rashi makes it sound like the person giving the hatra'ah is besafek, meaning let's say I'm warning you, I don't know if you have it or not. So I'm saying if you're, and the issue then is, according to Rashi, is that I can't properly warn someone, right? You give someone a warning, like if you go out, you're going to get this disease. So if you don't really believe it, then your warning is probably not as powerful as if you do believe it. And so since here you don't really know if he's over the Isser, it's not a real hatra'ah. Tosfos does not agree with that. Tosfos says the hatra'at safek issue is the person you're giving hatra'ah to, right? The person being over the Isser. And so he doesn't know. You could say to him, do you have chametz? He says, I don't think I have chametz. You say, if you have chametz, you're over this Isser. He says, I know. If I have chametz, I'm over the Isser. But of course, he thinks I don't have chametz because he doesn't have it, right? And so it's a question of him. So the issue then is hatra'at safek kamifagi, right? Says the Gemara, well, that could be a nice machloket, but they also already argued about this. They already argued about hatra'at safek, where Reish Lakish said it's not hatra'ah, and therefore you're not chayav, and Rabbi Yochanan said it is hatra'ah. What was the case there? The Itmar, let's say, this is a Gemara in Shavuot, right? Let's say you say, Shvu'ah she'ochel kikar zeh hayom. You wake up in the morning, you say, I swear I'm going to eat this loaf of bread today. Ve'avar hayom v'lo achla. The day passes and you don't eat it. So you were over on your Shvu'ah, right? Says the Gemara in Shavuot, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon Lakish Amri Tervayo, Eno Lokeh. You don't get makot for doing that prohibition. Why not? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Eno Lokeh Mishum Havi Lav Shein Bo Maaseh. So you didn't do anything, right? You said, I'm not going to eat it. Now, speech might be a thing, but you weren't over when you said that. When were you over? When the day passed and you didn't eat it. So that was a passive thing. V'chol lav she'ein bo maaseh, any lo taseh that doesn't have an action, ein lo kina lav, you're not chayiv makot. So that's the reason you don't get makot. But the fact is that if I had said to you in the morning, when you made your shvuah, right, I had said to you, don't make the shvuah because if you do and you don't eat it, you're going to be chayav, that's hatra'at safek. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that's not a problem. It doesn't matter if you don't know, right? Because you don't have definitive knowledge whether you're going to be over the Isser at that time. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar, Eino Lokeh, why don't you get makot for this, for violating this shvuah? Mishum dahav lehatrat safek. It's because the hatra'ah itself was safek. Because when they said to you, if you don't eat it, you're going to be over your shvuah, you thought you were going to eat it, right? Or you might have eaten it. Right? So, anyways, that's a discussion in Shavuot. But the bottom line is back to our Gemara, right? Why would we have to repeat this machloket where Rabbi Shlakish says that the chametz has to be with you in the Azara? Rabbi Yochanan says it doesn't have to literally be with you. We know of their opinions. Says Gemara, no, we don't. It must be the machloket here, la'olam, halfway down, be'al b'samich kamifagi. Machloket is whether when it says al chametz, it means literally with the chametz. You're holding on to it, or it's next to you. Vitzricha. Now, even though they already argued about the same thing when we talked about a carbon toda, you need to tell me both. If like in the chametz, if legal in the chametz, if they'd only argued about chametz where it says lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi havamina, I would have thought da'ahuhu dekam Rabbi Yochanan lo bin al b'samuch. Here, Rabbi Yochanan says you don't need to have the chametz literally with you. Mishum de isserhu, because there's an isser of chametz, right? You're not allowed to have chametz. Anywhere the chametz is, the chametz is. The point is, anywhere, if you have chametz, you have chametz. But you might have thought, mekadesh lechem, that remember, by a carbon toda, the shchita of the animal makes the lechem more kodesh. You might have thought that if you want to impart kedusha on the lechem, you would need them to be with it, physical proximity. So you might think lo kaddish, you need it to be together, ela bifnim. It's only mekadesh if it's with it. Ema modele of Shimon Lakish, you might think he agrees to Reish Lakish to be inan al b'samuch, that you need it to be next to it, right? Di'ita gave kaddish, lo kaddish. If it's there, it's kaddish. If it's not kaddish. Midavia klisharet, like a klisharet. Remember, we talked about the you take a kmitza, right? You take your karba. If you put it in the klisharet, it becomes kodesh. Until then, it doesn't become kodesh. So you might think you need the physical connection for something to become kodesh. So tzricha. That's why you need to say it, the machloket, also by a carbon toda. And if you had only said it by carbon toda, the yashmina linyan mikadesh lechem, you only said it by carbon toda, I would have thought the opposite. Havi amina behachkam Rav Shimon Lakish min al b'samuch. The reason Rav Shimon Lakish holds that you need al b'samuch by the bread of the carbon toda is because you need it to become kodesh. The ita gavai, if it's next to it kaddish, lo kaddish, it will become kodesh. If it's not physically there, it won't. Avalein chametz, you might think that in regards to chametz, the ema modele Rabbi Yochanan lo ba'in al b'samuch the isurahu, because the whole issue here is an isur, not a kedusha. The ita, and therefore it's shricha. And therefore you need the chiddush, you need to say it in both cases. And we paskin, I think like Reish Lakish, that it literally needs to be with you, and it needs to be in the azara, because when it says lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi, it means you physically have chametz with you in the azara at the time you do the shechita. Okay.
We figured it'd be a sign, like no chametz past this point, like in the
I'm
supermarket.
sure there were tons of, remember this is Erev Pesach in the afternoon when you're not allowed to have chametz.
I know. Well, I know, but you figure like check your pockets for chametz or something.
There were plenty of signs, I'm sure, but yes. Ba'amine Rabbi Oshaya, where am I? Ba'amine Rabbi Oshaya mi Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Oshaya asked Rabbi Ami the following question. Let's say the person who's shechting the animal does not have chametz, but one of the people in the chabura who's with them in the azar does have chametz. Now, remember, if you read the top line again of our daf, of our Almud, Reish Lakish already said, "O le'achamim be'chabura." So it says Rashi, Rabbi Oshaya is saying, I don't necessarily agree with Reish Lakish, or maybe he didn't know Reish Lakish, right? He was an Amora in Eretz Yisrael, I think, right? So he could have been totally independent of Reish Lakish. That was his question. Let's say it's not the person who shechs it, but it's someone else in the chabura. Mahu. Amar lei, so Ami said, it doesn't say miktiv lo tishchot al chemtzecha. It doesn't say lo, don't shech your own chametz. It says lo tishchot al chametz, any chametz. Ktiv. So if anyone in the chabura has chametz, again with you in the azara, then you would be over on the lo taseh. Amar lei, so he said, 1 second. So why is it just your chabura? What if some person from the end of the world, Rashi understands this means, someone who came from Japan, but they're in the Azara with you and they have chametz, right? So you're shechting your carbon in the north side of the Azara. There's a guy sitting in the south side holding out a sandwich. So maybe you're chayav for lo tishchot al chametz, right? Even though that person's not part of your chabura, right? But again, they have to be with you in the Azara, but they're not part of your chabura. So why don't you worry about them? Amar lei, Amar kra, we got to read the end of the pasuk. It says lo tishchot al chametz dam sivchi, and then the next words are v'lo yalin chelev chagi chelev. No, I read the wrong. V'lo yalin chelev chagi ad boker. No, that is the pasuk, right? It says lo tishchot al chametz dam sivchi v'lo yalin chelev chagi ad boker. Right? This is a different pasuk. Right? It's a pasuk in earlier. Right? don't shecht al chametz dam simchi, and don't leave over the chelev until the morning, which we discussed again last week a whole bunch, right? And then we compare those two to each other. Hanach the kaimel mishum lo yalin are the ones who are chayav mishum lo tishchot, and therefore only the people in the chabura who have a prohibition of leaving over the animal to the morning are the ones who are chayav on lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi. Says Rav Papa, one second, if that's the pasuk you're learning, then you have to add someone to the group. Hilkach, if you hold it from that pasuk, the kohen who's makdir at chelev over below taseh. If the kohen who's makdir the chelev has chametz, he also is over in a lotaseh. Right? Remember the sequence was you would bring the shechita, you would pass the blood. We're going to actually get to this in great detail. You pass the blood along to the mizbeach. Remember the shechita is done by a zar. Everything after the shechita has to be done by a kohen. The kohen would take the blood, pour it on the mizbeach, and then burn the chelev, the fats that you're not allowed to eat on the mizbeach. So the kohen who brings the chelev has the same prohibition. Remember, you're not allowed to leave it to the next morning. You have to burn it all that night, right? And so since that person is chayiv in lo yalin, they should be chayiv on lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi, right? It should include that person. So if the kohen who is makdir chelev, he's over below taseh, that's what Rav Papa said. It says, Gemara, you're right. Tanya Kavati Rav Papa. In fact, there's a Braita which says that explicitly. And let's pay attention now to the following Braita. Hashochet et Pesach ala chametz. Says the Braita, if you shecht your carbon Pesach and you have chametz with you, over below taseh, sorry. Over below taseh. Eimatai. Now this Braita gets back to what our Mishnah did, talking about when does this apply. Remember, I said in the Mishnah that it only applies on Erev Pesach. Says the Braita, Eimatai bisman shehu l'shochet. Oh, sorry, before you get to the time, who does it refer to? Bisman shehu l'shochet, the one who does the shechita, or the zorek. Now Rashi understands that zorek is the same as shochet, that we learned them out in the Tosefta. O le'achad mibnei chabura, or anyone who's part of the chabura, right? Now continues the Braita. Haya le'achad b'sofa olam. If someone who comes from the end of the world has it, in zakukla, we don't care, right? That's not part of my problem. The fact that someone else has chametz is not my concern. And continues the Braita, echad hashochet is applies to the one who shechs the carbon pesach. The echad hazorek, the echad hamaktir chayav. The one who does the haktarat emurim or the haktarat of the chelev is also chayav, which is exactly what Rav Papa said. Okay, now before you get too comfortable, continues the Braita, avahamoleket ha'of barba asar. Let's say you do malika of an oaf. Now, why would you be doing malika of an oaf? Remember, the carbon pesach, as we discussed last week, was brought after the tamid shel bein harabayim, right? You're not supposed to bring any carbonot after the tamid shel bein harabayim. But as we discussed last week, what's the exception to that? Someone who's mechusar kippurim, right? Someone who has done all of the steps. Let's say yoledet, a woman who gave birth, and it's the 80th day, right? And she's done everything in her carbonot and everything, or a zav, or a zava, or something like that. That person who's mechusar kippurim is allowed to bring their kippurim after the tamid shel bein harabayim, because in order to eat the carbon pesach that night, they have to get their kapara. They have to come to heart. So let's say the person, Rashi says we choose a bird, because a bird is very often brought as mechusar kippurim, but it does not always, right? But a yoledet brings it, a zav brings it, a mitzorah brings it. So all these people, if they are molek the oaf, ba'arba'a asar, and they have chametz, eino over below taseh. They're not included in the Yisr of Lo Taseh because it's only for carbon pesach, right? Sorry, where am I? In over below klum. That's what the Braita says. Ask the Gemara 1 second. You just prove from this Braita that if you are maktir, if you do the haktara, you burn on the mizbeach the parts of the carbon pesach, and you have chametz you're over on a Lo Taseh, you're a mini. There's another Braita which seems to contradict that. The Braita says the following: Hashochet et pesach ala chametz. If you shecht your Pesach and you have chametz, over below taseh. Okay, that's not news to anyone. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, which he said in our Mishnah, afa tamid, not just the carbon Pesach, but also the tamid shel bein harabayim. If you shecht the tamid and you have chametz, you're over a lo taseh. Amru lo, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, lo amru el Pesach bilvad. No, I disagree. They only said it about Pesach alone. Now, ematai, now this is the same words as the previous Braita. When are you chayav for shechting a carbon, either the Pesach or the Tamid according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you have chametz, bisman sheyesh l'shochet, o l'zorek, o lecha b'mnei chabura, right? The one who does the shchita or the zrika or anyone in the chabura, But if haya le'echad besof olam ein zakuk lo. So far, this is exactly the same thing in the first Braita. However, we didn't stop that while we were ahead. Continues the Braita now, 3 lines from the bottom. Echad ha-shochet, 2 lines, sorry now. The shochet, ve'echad ha-zarek, ve'echad ha-molek, which is a contradiction, right? Because the previous Braita said that if you do malika, you're not chayav for lo tishchot. This Braita says you are chayav. And continues this Braita and says, ve'echad ha-mazeh chayav. And the one who does mazeh hazaav, the blood of a bird, is chayav. But if you do kmitza, eino over belotase, you're not chayav lotase, which seems to be confusing. And hamaktirat imurim, if you bring the parts of the animal on the mizbeach of the carbon pesach, eino over belotase, you're also not chayav lotase. This is Gemara. One second, that contradicts what we just said. Kasha malika malika. So there's 2 problems. First is that the first Braita said that if you do malika, you're pater, and the second Braita says if you do malika, you're chayav, right? And furthermore, kasha aktara aktara. There's a question that the first Braita says if you're maktir de imurim, you're chayav, which is, remember what Rav Papa told us, because anyone who's chayav in lina, in halanan, leaving it overnight, is also chayav in lo tishlot al chametz dam zivchi. But the second Braita says aktara was pater. This is where you're right. Those are really good questions. But I got even a bigger question. The second line on Samach Dalet, Tikshilach hi gufa. The Braita itself does not make any sense. To Katani, the words of the Braita were, Lo amru el bepesach bilvad. The Braita says, we only said this about, right, 4 lines in the bottom. Lo amru el bepesach bilvad. That was the response to Rabbi Yehuda. And then the Braita continued and said, V'hadar tani, then we said, Echad ha-shochet, v'echad ha-zarek, v'echad ha-malik, v'echad ha-mazeh. Now remember, molika is a bird. It doesn't happen with the carbon pesach. Haza'ah is the blood of a bird. It doesn't happen with the carbon pesach. So how do you explain the whole Braita? Ella, the Braita, you have to understand it this way. The Braita is going according to Rabbi Shimon, both Braita. Hava Rabbi Shimon. Remember, Rabbi Shimon was the opinion in our Mishnah, if you recall, that there's a prohibition on Pesach and on Erev Pesach. Maybe the other way. On Erev Pesach and on Pesach. On Erev Pesach, the prohibition only applies to the carbon Pesach. On Pesach, the prohibition applies to any carbon that you bring. If you have chametz during Pesach and you bring a carbon, you're over lo tishchot al chametz dam zivchi, right? Because there's an isser of chametz and you're bringing a carbon. And so this is how you have to understand the Braita. Malika lo kasha. In one place it said malika you're chayav. In one place it said you're not. It depends. Kan bar ba'asar. On the 14th you're only chayav. You're not chayav for malika because you're only chayav for carbon Pesach. But kan b'chol shamoy. If you bring a carbon during Pesach, then you're chayav because that's what Rabbi Shimon said. Vidi Rabbi Shimoni. And haktara nami lo kasha. What about haktara? What about burning the parts on the mizbeach? How do you explain that? One Braita said you're chayav and one said you're not. So it says, you're right, but that's a machloket tanaim. Tanaihi. The ika the makish haktara shchita. Ika man de lo makish. There are some who say haktara falls in the same category as shchita, and therefore, just like if you shecht carbon with chametz, you're chayav alotase. If you do the burning of the mizbeach with chametz, you're chayav alotase, and some don't compare it. Pasuk only said the word shchita. That's all it applies to, and so that's how you explain these. Braito. Tomorrow we will just finish off and go through Rabbi Shimon's opinion about why during Pesach you're also chayav if you have chametz when you shecht any karban that's a kosher karban. God willing, tomorrow morning we'll pick this up at 7:30 a.m. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone.
Thank you.
Shavua Tov, thank you.
Okay.